today we need to talk about the small boats again. I'd like to actually, rather than just pointing at it...
Sorry, did Starmer not smash the boats? I heard something about smashing the boats.
You had a good conference.
Rishi promised he was going to
smashing the gangs.
But no, nothing has been done. It's got worse, if anything. But I did want to actually try and drill down into this a little bit, rather than just sort of pointing at it and tutting. We've done that enough. Yeah. I've even criticised some people in Reform for doing that. It's like, yeah, we know. Everyone knows. Yeah. We're being invaded, yeah. But I thought because we've got you on today, Stephen, we could try, because I know you know loads about this, and being an ex-MEP, one of the best people to talk about it. So just to quickly say why it's in the news is that on Saturday there was a record number, 656 boat people came over on 11 boats. A few were turned back.
New record.
It's not an overall one-day record. It was one day in 2022, which was obviously during the Tory government.
Must try harder.
Been 800 and odd, I think.
1,300. Yeah. One day in early September 2022, 1,300 in one day. I can't remember if it was Preeti or Suella or James was the Home Secretary at the time. I can't remember, but one of them were. But yeah, so far this year it was a record. And so far this year, that is an actual record. Year to date, 8,064 have come over. Mm-hmm. Projected something in the ballpark of 47,000 are likely to cross the channel.
That's right. I think we put this up on the Centre for Migration. We've done an estimate. It's 27% higher than last year. So that would put us on about 47,000. But if I take us back to the time you talked about 2022, which I'm being conservative at this stage, that was a similar sort of number, and we're bigger than that in the early stages, and that would lead us to go actually more towards the 70,000. But at the moment, I'm sticking on the kind of more conservative 45, 47 to 50,000. But I think that I haven't got the numbers on me. I think you might be having them later. But you look on average on the first year, it's about £50,000 per individual just in their first year. That's before their claims are even dealt with. That's in terms of cost, food, and energy, dealing with medicine, border force, and that's why we've come to around 8 billion was my estimate last year, a year that we're dealing with immigration and asylum. I think it's going to go up.
And of course, the financial cost, at least to my mind, is sort of the least of the problems.
Sure.
But nonetheless, that is completely unsustainable and insane.
I just got a letter from the tax man saying I need to pay my tax, so it's actually very much in the front of my mind.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, those numbers are giant. So, like, for example, some people, our enemies, quite often like to talk about, oh, you're all a nation of immigrants anyway. Well,
we're not. Absolutely not.
And anyway, if you look at something like the Huguenot invasions.
Well, it's hardly an invasion.
Yeah, it's not even an invasion.
What, 50,000 over 80 years or something?
Yeah, like if you look at the numbers compared to what
Protestants,
compared to what's happening here, Dutch Protestants, still the numbers. If you're just looking at straight up numbers, it's tiny. Like William the Conqueror came over with what, 10,000 less?
Yeah. Probably 100,000 Normans in total, something like that at most.
I mean, okay, so that's happening. So one of the things I wanted to sort of ask you about, Stephen, or drill down a bit on is, okay, let's just imagine we've got a government that was prepared to truly act on it. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is the ECHR.
Yes.
Because some people say we don't even need to leave the ECHR. We've already got, if the government just had balls, we've already got things. Just let me finish. We've already got things in place where a government, if it was prepared to just act, has got everything they would need to do it. Others say, no, you have to leave the ECHR because everything else is sort of downstream from that.
Okay. I would have to go back a little bit further than that. Okay. You actually have to go onto the UN Convention on Human Rights, which is and on the Refugee Convention. Both of those set in formality the principles that a nation has to undertake when they're dealing with someone who claims asylum. Let's just take, for example, the goodness of our own hearts, that all of these people are genuine asylum seekers. None of them are coming over for economic reasons. We have to put into our legislation, which we have done for our immigration acts, the fact that when someone claims asylum, we have to give them a lawyer, We have to house them, we have to feed them, we have to clothe them, we have to throw medicine for them, and we have to educate them.
It's like adopting a puppy.
That's
Great. You know, I've adopted this puppy. Brilliant.
it's a rather expensive puppy.
Yeah, an
that we now know.
extremely pampered puppy.
Yeah. Yeah.
50,000 years. So that's the first principle. Then what happens is the European Court on Human Rights gives a variety of rights to people to come in. The most important one is a right to family life and a right to not being imprisoned and not to have certain removals.
This is the one that the judges keep getting us on.
Yes. So what happens is the UN Convention on Refugees says that you can actually remove people. It actually gives you provisions if they're not part of safety of our country, if they are a danger to the public. All of those can go. So someone's got to interpret that. And we had our common law, and our common law was perfectly fine, but we did sign the European Convention on Human Rights. And that gives lawyers the opportunity to go to one of their asylum seekers and say, okay, why have you come here? Well, I'm running away because I'm gay. Actually, at
Because
the
I have
moment,
debts.
at the moment, we don't have that in our law. You can't, we can get rid of you. So they make a claim under the European Courts of Human Rights that person can stay because when they are out in Sudan, they're being abused and therefore they have to leave because they're gay. And then we have the international provisions. So you get that in place, then the courts start extending it. And that's why we get the ridiculous scenario where people are now being told, well, my chicken McNuggets actually taste different in Albania than they do here. It will breach my son's rights. So the courts have extended it. But what's happened to us is all of that now is embedded in our common law. We have legislation, ECHR, and common law. So if you want to get rid of the legal decisions defining what is family life and what are the provisions of life privileges and all the rest of it that we've got in international law, are you a danger or not, then you need to remove the ECHR because that gives no background for them to be able to go back. Look, the judges in Strasbourg have said chicken McNuggets is enough. So that goes. But then we have to remove the Human Rights Act because that's embedded it into our common law. And then you have to go back and get judges to actually overrule the human rights elements that are now embedded in our common law, because all the judges will do is go, okay, ECHR's gone, HR's gone, it's still there. Look, judge friendly of mine of twice removed made that decision in 2023.
And one of the really frustrating things is that if you read Article 8 of the ECHR, which is what they always get the person on, it's the right to the family life. And the thing is, it doesn't actually say any of these things.
Nope.
Like the entire text is Article 8 states that everyone has the right to respect for their private and family life, home and correspondence. This right includes protection against interference by public authorities except when such interference is lawful and necessary for democratic society for reasons such as national security or public safety. Additionally, Article 8 encompasses rights related to personal identity and privacy, including protection against unauthorized surveillance and data collection. And somehow that arrives at, I can't be deported back to Albania because my nuggets.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about it is the US is not a member of the ECHR. They are a member of the Refugee Convention. So in the Refugee Convention, when they claim asylum, they can do that. But when they're making the assessments, they can turn around on exactly the rules within the UN Convention that says you're no longer you are a security threat. You're a danger to the public. And that's why they're putting loads of them on planes and getting rid. So you have a situation where America had 200 to 350,000 a month coming across during Biden. Under Trump, 8,200 and odd came across. Every one of them was arrested and deported instantly. The border crisis in the United States is over because they're not in the ECHR and they're using convention provisions plus their own rules on visas to say, you're not welcome here. We can get rid of you.
It just telegraphs to the lot of them, don't bother coming.
Yes.
We will literally remove you. And so the border encounters dropped off a cliff.
Which is one of the, arguably the most important thing, is saying that something will happen to you. So my question is this then. Again, let's just imagine you've got a government and a leader who's prepared to actually work in our interests and have
let's enter into the realm of fantasy.
Yeah, pure fantasy. Of
Pretend.
Course. If we were, then so you're saying that we'd need to. Can the government, can the Prime Minister, sort of unilaterally just leave the ECHR, or does even that need to go through Parliament?
No, it has to go through Parliament. But what he would need to do is a number of things. I would say any Prime Minister who's preparing this would have to have someone like Stephen Miller did for President Trump over 5 years, prepare every strategic element in government, both at a federal level and also a state
Game
level.
plan, a roadmap.
They have to have a game plan. And that game plan would be they have to have the legislation for removing ourselves from the ECHR ready, because you've got a parliament that will vote for it. The same for the HR. And then you would have to turn around and find a way of removing those in the House, the Supreme Court, who would actually support those and get your own people in. We can't do that. They can in the
Why
US.
not just abolish the Supreme Court?
Well, that's the point. What I would do then is I would end the Supreme Court and bring it back to the House of Lords, and the House of Lords then can be filled with political decision makers as well as lawyers who would make those decisions for you. Secondly, you need to completely revamp the immigration rules, procedures, and courts to be able to take into consideration what goes on. You may have to use Privy Council rules and ability to be able to force people in the Privy Council. I saw Douglas Carswell wrote some seriously good stuff about that. But his big issue on that would be, and my issue, that if you look at who are the members of the Privy Council, most of them are Blairites.
Can we not replace them there? How did they
So
get
again,
Is
we'd
that
have
not
to
prime
find a way.
ministerial privilege? Can
So
put whoever he wants in.
You can pack that in a way. So you'd have to have that as all part of your preparation to do so. And once you've done that, you need to be in a position where you've got to instruct your own lawyers, government lawyers, and many of those government lawyers are the ones who turned around and said, oh, we can't use the law of the sea to return people back to France because the Royal Navy will get sued under the Human Rights Act. So even within your own lawyers in the kind of judicial system that you've got employed by the government, actually are people you might need to remove as well. Yep. Just as the way that you're doing in the Fed, the FBI, the DOJ in the United States, because it's embedded across all parts of the system. Now, that's a political element that we don't have the advantage to the United States do. We can get rid of legislation, but all those other parts would need to be thought about incredibly carefully, get it ready, and you'd have to do it quickly.
Yes.
Okay, so let's try and get this clear. Whether everything I'm about to say could be done with one sort of great repeal act, with one
The David Starkey approach.
yeah,
Scrap it all.
What one great sort of act of Parliament which sort of or at least starts this roadmap, this strategy to get it all done. But so leave the ECHR, leave anything that the UN has put in place to hamstring us.
Well, if you can do that, that would include it. If you want to remove yourself from the UN Convention, it's the same sort of thing. If you want to remove yourself, and I think Trump is actually looking at that at the moment. I know that in what Stephen Miller and various other people are tweeting about at the moment is that they're considering whether they should even leave the UN Refugees Convention. If you did that, that removes all the rights. That's where they're talking about abolishing asylum. And Kerkorian, I think it's Mark Kerkorian, has written a really persuasive argument recently, and I'll put it up on CMAP over the end of the day or something, and we'll retweet it out to yourselves. That's a really useful piece of where they're thinking about it. So a Great Repeal Act, yes, if you wanted to go UN Convention, get rid of that. ECHR, HR, get rid of that. There were various ancillary pieces of legislation related to the Immigration Acts.
The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court would
Rid of
need to go as well, and we bring back into the House of Lords. So you could have a
Packing the House of Lords.
You could get a great repeal bill. The packing of the House of Lords, the packing of the Privy Council wouldn't be part of the legislative process.
No,
That would be
sure,
part of political processes.
So would that be an executive thing?
Yeah, that would be the
Minister.
type of executive prime ministerial role. So, and that's where you get Douglas Carswell's ideas coming into place, utilising Privy Council. So there's legislation.
Like a department of the Prime Minister.
Yes.
To bypass the Cabinet Office or the Home Office.
Exactly. That would be one of the things that he'd need to consider. So you've got legislation. You'd have change of structures of the civil service as well as the cabinet and stroke prime ministerial offices. And then you've also got to be able to use executive provisions across a variety of areas. And one of the things that I think could be done very cleverly over a period of time, Lois, is the preparation for the secondary legislation that would remove, say, Home Office asylum rules, immigration rules of procedure. All of that can be done as well because they're secondary legislation. But they as long as they're prepared, they could be attached to the back of the Great Repeal Act, and then they could go through on a secondary legislation overnight and be done as well.
So really all it takes is 350 barbarians and a very well prepared prime minister to do this.
Yes, and I think that's what you're looking at in Trump, is that he's took one individual, and I mentioned Stephen Miller, but there are obviously Kokori and there are others around this. But if you look at Miller as the figurehead, he didn't do that on his own.
No.
Now, he prepared that with lawyers across the various states. He would have talked to various governors who were supporting him to build that package, and then they would have took it to Trump and would worked out how it was done. And then their teams would have said, this is what we're going to do on day one. The speed that they did that in the US shows how planning can work if you want to change things rapidly.
What do you think about the idea, we already mentioned, or Douglas Carswell mentioned the idea of the Department of the Prime Minister in order to sort of wield prime ministerial fiat with real power. What do you think
David Starkey's voice saying this would be a centralisation of executive power in the Prime Minister, and this will have knock-on effects?
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, what do you think of the idea, the concept of that you create a new department and you call it whatever you want, the Department for Remigration or Department for whatever you want to call it, a new border department or something, and you take all the powers away from the Home Office and the RNLI and everyone that's involved in getting us flooded by foreign criminals, and you put it all in this new department, and you make sure that that's staffed by people that are acting in our interests. Is that right? Yeah. Is that just pie in the sky nonsense to you, or is that something?
No, I think it's not pie in the sky nonsense. One, if you deal with that, and I think it was very well put by Carswell, you recognise that you also have to change the civil service rules as well in order to do that, because you're going to have to employ people from the civil service. We don't have a situation where we've got in the United States where once Biden went, literally apartment blocks were being emptied by people who were leaving. Over 10,000 people just leave Washington overnight because they're all Bidenites and Democrats, and they're replaced by 10,000 people who are now employed by the Republicans to do their jobs. We don't have that. So you need to get that particular department to be able to have the rules changed too. I think it's feasible, but I do worry about exactly the point you've raised and what Starkey has raised, is once you do that, we start to move towards the United States.
Yeah, and Labour will just inherit.
And if Labour comes in, they have the same thing. So then we'd have to completely change, in my view, the way that we look at our Supreme Court. It would have to become nominated just like the US. And in many ways, what I would prefer is our own homegrown Bill of Rights. But as I've thought about this on many times, and I've talked about it, I'm deeply concerned that we had a common law that created our own Bill of Rights, and that's been overruled and destroyed by the executive employing EU sort of regulations in, that's enabled people like Blair to bring in Quangos, to take those aspects of our lives over, and they run it without any political interference or democracy really controlling them. My worry is if we do that with the Prime Minister, whether they will be able to have that as well. So in principle, I like it. I like to have the idea that someone can come in ready and willing to do it. We've prepared, we've got a department ready to go, but will that then have the enduring power to ensure that the democratic values that we have as a nation sustain itself when it comes under attack, as it will do, by the next generation? And we saw what happens with the trade unions. They'll come in. But we can remove their money. One of the most powerful things that we have when you're in government is removing their cash.
Right.
Remove the funding. Once the money goes, as you've seen with Doge, once the cash goes, they implode.
I have this concept, and it's very, very straightforward, but I don't see a problem with it, that it wasn't that long ago we had a country without all these quangos and without the Supreme Court. If we just literally just swept away that entire edifice, one criticism of that would be, well, that makes a Prime Minister extremely powerful, or presidential level powerful, and what happens when it falls into the hands of the next party. But I feel like that's the lesser of two evils, though.
I would much prefer us to have a cabinet that is strong enough with proper departments being run under a democratic mandate in which they can be chastised by the Prime Minister. And yes, I'd much prefer to have a period where you'd have Thatcher going up against her enemies within the cabinet, Yes, they were briefing each other against each other, but it wasn't a fault. They were still under our control to an extent. Blair changed it all. And that's part of the downfall of this nation.
So one of the last things I wanted to ask you about, pick your brain about, is, again, I think it was something Starkey had said not too long ago. He said that, again, imagine this fictional government acting in our interest with a spine. Imagine they came in and the Prime Minister says, I'm just declaring a state of emergency. They're sitting around the cabinet table in number 10. Okay, it's an emergency because we're being invaded by 40 to 70,000 people a year. I'm taking this entire question away from Border Force, the RNLI, and the Home Office, and I'm giving it to my Defence Minister. Do what you've got to do. Go and put a frigate or something in the channel. Go and put SBS, SAS dudes in speedboats. Stop it today. If they did that, Starkey said, I think he said, I don't want to get him wrong, but paraphrasing, he said that, well, you get a knock on the door from the police then. The police will come round and want to interview the Prime Minister and the Cabinet because you're breaking laws. Is that right? Is that true?
I mean, I think Starkey will have looked at that more particular than me.
I hope I haven't got him wrong on that.
If that's the case, it's entirely a possibility. I'd have to look through that. But my understanding of it is, of course, that the Prime Minister can change any part of the government to go with any particular department. So he could move the aspects of border force and control out of the Home Office into the Defence Department. And of course, if you're in such a big scenario where you've got a large majority, that too could be part of your Great Repeal Act. The question, I think, where he's got the issue that I see is that one of the reasons, one of the departments that have stopped us from being able to use legislation and international law, which is the law of the sea, SOLAS. SOLAS enables us to return the boats to France today. The Home Affairs Select Committee heard from experts, both barristerial and professors, that said that we could do that.
So the Royal Marines literally just tow these dinghies straight back to the beach on Calais, drop them off there, and France can't say, oh, you're invading our beaches.
No, and this is where we came into two particular issues. One is political, which is the Foreign Office say we can't do that because we're upsetting our French friends and this will cause an international, dispute. And maybe if I go on holiday back to the Dordogne, they might not allow me to be there and they'd actually tell me off over dinner. So, Prime Minister, you can't really do that. And I'm sure that's sort of the real aspects of the Foreign Office. That's one of the reasons they do. And I've actually spoken to Foreign Office people who really didn't like that suggestion at senior level to me. They said it was an international, we can't do that. It goes against the grain of who we are as a nation. Actually, no, you can do it. The law says we can do it. And then the second part was legal. This is where the lawyers for the the Defence Ministry lawyers said that we would be putting any soldier at risk or naval officer at risk of charges for potential manslaughter at sea if anyone died or was injured. So therefore they can't do it. And that's why they backed off from doing that.
Is that true, though, or is that just...
Oh, again, there is...
true?
It's an argument that could be put forward in the courts, just as we've done with soldiers. Look how many soldiers that we've tried to challenge across the country for what they've done in Ireland, in Iraq, Afghanistan. They've done all of those. So, again, a Great Repeal Act would remove those particular points and make it clear that they're safe to do so. So we might not be able to do it on day one, as Trump did.
All right, we've got day 2.
But we've got a few days in which we can do it.
So is within the purview of Parliament to pass new legislation preventing members of the Royal Navy or the SAS or whatever it is from being prosecuted if anyone was injured when they were towed back to the Calais beach?
They can change the legislation to change any criminal.
It's within our power to...
Yeah, all that would leave the lawyers then is arguing the international law. And we would say, okay, we remove ourselves from that too.
Yeah.
Right.
We remove ourselves from that aspects of the law of the sea that doesn't apply to us.
If I recall correctly, the entire point of the English Civil War is to establish the absolute supremacy of Parliament.
And that's exactly it.
So, okay, let's use it, right?
But if you want a clear example of why they can do it and how quickly they can do it, just look what we were talking about early on over everybody getting on trains down to on a Saturday to vote for a piece of legislation to try and protect Scunthorpe. Mm-hmm. If they can do it to protect Scunthorpe, they can do it to protect our borders.
So I hate to interrupt us there, but we're going to have to
Okay.
move on for time.
Just like to finish, just saying, so there is a strategy or a roadmap possible to stop the boats. It's not impossible.
We need individuals who can be funded to, over a period of time, to create that scenario, legislation and practicalities in preparation, in the hope that we get a government of those who support that particular view.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.